Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Lesser Known But Awesome Heroes. And today, I'll be talking about a pretty semi-known DC character, one who had a very bad movie adaptation made on him, and also probably one of the most recognized Wild West superheroes, if you will, in the entire comic book universe. And that is the character of Jonah Hex. And I got a lot of information to cover, so let's not mess around. Okay, Jonah Hex' first appearance was in All-Star Western issue 10 in February to March of 1972. And he was created by John Albano and Tony, I'm going to just spell his name out, Dezuniga. His team affiliations is that he's been part of the Apache and Navajo tribes, the Confederate States of America. I'm going to just spell this out because I can't really pronounce that. K-I-O-Y, not Y, but W, A tribes. 5 warriors from Forever, and the Black Lantern Corps is apparently the most notable alias. One of the most notable things on him is the Mark of the Demon. Now here's his abilities. He is an outstanding marksman, his ability to quick draw, able to gun down multiple enemies in one draw, high human strength, agility, reflexes, and athleticism, an expert hand-to-hand combatant, a master tracker and detective, a high level of intelligence, and horned a danger sense from years of training and experience. Now, I'm not going to go into his debut and all this publication history stuff, and there's even a deal talking about a timeline for Hex. So I'm not going to really go into the significant dates that were. There's also a deal in here apparently about significant dates in his life. But I'm not going to talk about that either. I'm just going to, let's see. There's also one on recurring villains and supporting cast. I guess I can talk about that one here. Okay, now let's get into the character's biography, if you will. Okay, raised by his alcoholic father, Woodson Hex, Jonah was a regular victim of physical abuse as a child. His father eventually stopped supporting him and sold him into slavery with an Apache tribe at the age of 13 during 1851. They worked him constantly until one day when he saved their chieftain from a puma, and after he saved their chieftain from a puma, he was welcomed as a full-fledged member of the tribe. The chief took Jonah as his own son, but his adopted brother, whose name I can't pronounce, Nohtantee, grew jealous. And so the chieftain's son shared Jonah's affections for a young woman named White Fawn. So he betrayed his brother during their manhood rite at the age of 16 and left Jonah for dead with their enemies. He was rescued by a cavalry patrol, though they shot him in the gut when he tries to stop their slaughter. Left for dead a second time, he is nursed back to health by an old trapper in the woods. Returning to his tribe's camp, he finds them long since gone. The American Civil War. As Jonah grew into adulthood, he joined the U.S. Army as a cavalry scout, and by 1861, the country was radically divided on issues of slavery and Southern rights. When the war erupted between the northern states and the southern states, Jonah shifted his loyalties more towards the Confederate Army and enlisted as a lieutenant in the 4th Cavalry. Ironically, Hex, a former slave, now found himself fighting to preserve the very institution that victimized him. During this time, he met a fellow soldier named Jeb Turnbull, and the two became close friends. However, when time went on, Hex found himself increasingly torn between his loyalties to the South and his feelings towards the treatment of slaves. And in September of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation. And Jonah realized that he could no longer support a system that elected to hold his fellow man in bondage. However, he had no intention of betraying his comrades by cooperating with the Union. Therefore, he felt the best option for him was to surrender and wait out that war. He abandoned his post and went to the Union camp at Fort Charlotte, sneaking into the camp's captain's quarters to surrender directly. The camp's captain pressured Hex to reveal the location of his Confederate Union, but Jonah refused to yield the information. However, as an orderly examined samples of clay from the iron shoes on Hex's horse and successfully determined where the rebels were stationed. The Union soldiers tracked the enemy back to their camp and took them by surprise. As the rebels were arrested, the Union captain, smarting from the fact that Hex was able to penetrate the fort's security, publicly thanked Jonah for his assistance, marking him as a traitor in the eyes of his former unit. Hex responded by brutally punching him and was sentenced to solitary confinement. Hex then found a shaft at the bottom of his cell. And used it to access the compound where Jeb Turnbull and the other prisoners were being held and aided them in trying to escape, but the fort's soldiers were prepared for them. Unbeknownst to Hex, the captain had deliberately had the escape tunnel dug. The fort didn't have enough food to support its soldiers, let alone prisoners, so he had manipulated Hex into staging a breakout so that he could legitimately claim that the prisoners were shot trying to escape. In an event that history would know as the Fort Charlotte Massacre, the Union soldiers shot down nearly every escapee in cold blood, turning Jeb Turnbull. Jonah found himself a victim of a Union bullet as well, but managed to survive long enough to kill the camp's captain. A handful of survivors, unaware of the captain's treachery, blamed Jonah and spread the word of his apparent betrayal. Following the massacre, Jonah patched himself up and moved out towards the western frontiers. Eventually returning to his village in 1866, he finds that his adopted brother had since married White Fawn. He declares his betrayal to the chieftain, but the accusations were denied, and that it was decided that they would deliberate through trial by combat. And the chief's adoptive son sabotaged Jonah's tomahawk, forcing him to cheat and end the fight with his knife. For breaking the rules of combat and killing his son, the chieftain declares that Jonah would be branded with the mark of the demon rather than completely killed on the spot, and he would be exiled to wander the wilderness as a penalty of death. Years later, when he returned again to rescue a kidnapped white woman, he was captured, and White Fawn was shot dead by the chieftain for trying to help him escape. Jonah killed his adoptive father in return and gunned down half the tribe, who went after him with the help of... I'm not even going to try to pronounce this character's name. And I'm not even going to try to spell it because it's too many letters. But later on, as a bounty hunter, Jonah would then be inspired to become a bounty hunter after murdering his first criminal, the outlaw Lucas Mad Dog McGill. He gunned down Mad Dog while the man was beating his wife outside of a saloon in his inherited stupor. Hex believed him to be his own father, Woodson Hex, abusing his mother, Virginia Hex. The local deputy insisted that even drunk it was the fastest draw he had ever seen, and gave him the massive bounty on McGill's head. Hex accepted the money and scattered it on the streets as he left town by horseback. His first bounty poster was in 1866 on an old army buddy named Eddie Cantwell. The manhunter, R.B. Stoneham, stole Hex's reward by murdering Cantwell and then humiliated him by taking his guns. 8 years later, they met again while Hex was bringing down the Jason Crowley gang, and he intended to take revenge on Stoneham, but found him wheelchair-ridden. The two men went for a drink instead. The town of Paradise Corners hired him to take down a criminal named Big Jim. But then he thinks of settling down there. They shun him and treat him like a monster. His next reward is a robber named Terry White, who betrays him after Hex finds him in the desert and nurses him back to health. Weird Western tales. Jonah receives a wolf named Ironjaws when he tries to rescue a peaceful Pawnee tribe from their local town and fails to save the girl who owned him. His former mentor, Wendy Taylor, calls Jonah to help find his son, Todd Taylor, who had turned outlaw. Todd guns down his father, and Hex avenges the man who taught him. Ironjaws dies after venturing deep into the desert to rescue Hex from dying of exposure where two outlaws had tied him up. His next adventure was that he would take down a corrupt sheriff who was scamming his town, and then a corrupt hanging judge at the next. Briefly becoming the bodyguard of a sideshow attraction whose owner he murders after the man tries to frame him for a heinous crime. Finding an escaped psychopath on the run, his next bounty is Gentleman Killer. Fort Lang is apparently attacked by Indians and uncovers a railroad conspiracy to drive them off their land. Then another one, and another one. Some bandits are hunting down injure an old lady who is showing him kindness. He funds a children's hospital to make sure she gets the medicine she needs before chasing them down and slaughtering them all. While tracking down Blackjack Jurgis, Jorgis, I'm getting ahead of myself, for revenge, Hex is ambushed by ex-Confederates sent by Quentin Turnbull. His mentor, Hank Brewster, dies in the gunfight, and his first horse, the General, is killed by stray bullets. Briefly hired by the U.S. Secret Service, he topples an assassination conspiracy against Ulysses S. Grant, and he is temporarily blinded from his injuries. He takes down an entire gang without his sight. He then fights corrupt army officials when he takes down a greedy landowner, robbing pioneers and letting them die. 5 Warriors from Forever. The Lord of Time assembled a team known as the 5 Warriors from Forever, where he believed that his time machine, the Eternity Brain, would end all existence. The team included Jonah Hex alongside the Black Pirate, Enemy Ace, Lady Liberty, and the Viking Prince. To make them powerful enough to become a threat, they were each energized with a special force. Their purpose was to fight the Justice League and the Justice Society to strengthen their resolve through defeat, which they succeeded in doing. Eventually, the 5 warriors rebelled against their master and assaulted the Palace of Eternity. Hex got into a gunfight with a T-Rex, but they were apparently defeated, and they eventually returned to their own times using the Cosmic Treadmill. Okay, what the hell? He got into a gunfight with a T-Rex. Try to figure out the comic book logic in that one. He later would encounter the Justice League separately, and with several other Western heroes, including Batlash, Cinnamon, and Scalp Hunter, the Lord of Time sent members of the League back to the 19th century in an absurd plot to rule the world. Hex meets an amnesiac Hal Jordan in the desert and nurses him back to health. They team up with Elongated Man, Flash, and Zatanna to take down some robotic gunfires while the League deals with the antimatter android that threatens to destroy the Earth. In the present, Superman defeats the Time Lord and restores things to normal. Crisis on Infinite Earths. He becomes involved in the first crisis when he was summoned alongside several other heroes to fight for the Monitor. Hex would then go against the Shadow Demons alongside Batlash, Cyborg, Firebrand, John Stewart, Johnny Thunder, Nighthawk, Simon, and Scalp Hunter. Alexander Luthor and Harbinger gather the heroes of several Earths to discuss strategy, and Hex was present in the crowd to witness Pariah's warnings. Here we go with Hex. Now, Jonah would then disappear in a flash of light one night at a saloon in 1875. He was abducted from his own era by the villainous Reinhold Barsten, Borste, E.N., who transported him into a post-apocalyptic Seattle, Washington in the 21st century. His intention was to use the time-traveling gunslinger as a warrior, but instead Jonah escaped and met a motorcycle gang known as the Street Reapers. They instantly took him in after he rescued one of their warriors and obtained a zone suit to protect himself from radiation by killing their cowardly leader, Falcon, in self-defense. His companions are a group of soldiers from the Vietnam War, though they were betrayed by a robotic duplicate of the gang member, and none survived except for Captain Stanley Harris. Briefly, he becomes a shotgun man for a drug dealer named Barnaby Blossom. When he discovers that Barnaby is getting kids hooked, he then kills the man. The real gang member tracks him down, and they are stranded in the desert together without water after a roadside ambush. They survive by walking 12 miles in an oasis and fighting off killer mutant worms. Having attracted negative attention from the underworld conglomerate by knocking over their drug shipment, Hex and the gang member are hunted down by their mercenary chain and defeat him in a junkyard. The conglomerate then enlists Hex to help them take down Barston, and he gets captured by Barston in a fight so that he can destroy the villain's time travel device after using it. Together, Hex and the gang member infiltrate the complex, and Harris is sent home, but Jonah doesn't make it to the time machine before it's destroyed. They escape as the building explodes, and Barston supposedly dies in the blast. And Jonah would get newer and improved guns after he wins a dangerous live shooting gallery, but the gang member is kidnapped while he's fighting. He is then captured by a scientist named Dr. Adamant, Adamant, but escapes and destroys his society before Jonah can be turned into a robot. His next challenge is an anti-sin cult called the Sin Killers, who he demolishes while rescuing the daughter of a local man. Barston is revealed to have survived the explosion. Briefly, Jonah actually meets the Legion of Superheroes while he is time traveling in their time bubble. New York City's leading crime syndicate, the Carbine, send Hex after their greatest enemy, the Batman, by framing him for the gang member's murder. The two men fight and nearly kill each other. Realizing they're on the same side, Hex helps Batman stop the Carbine from unleashing giant killer robots on the populace. The gang member is discovered to have been brainwashed and trained as a professional wrestler, calling himself Blonde Spitfire. Briefly, Hex is captured by two cannibals and forced to escape through the sewers. Now enraged, he begins hunting down members of the Carbine. The Road Reapers are captured by a group of warriors called the Dogs of War, who passed them into slave labor for an alien called Sivan Turash, Tarah. Jonah is forced to fight the deadly brainwashed gang member, but he brings her back to normal after knocking her out. Huh. Actually, the gang member's name, I'm looking at it a lot more clearly now, because apparently whoever wrote this, or at least wrote the first indignation of what I just read, apparently misspelled her name. Somebody corrected it. It's actually pronounced Stiletta. The gang member's name is Stiletta. But the alien would reveal that he is a time traveler, and his slave camps are building a machine to thwart an alien invasion from XXGGS. And Hex is attacked by a rogue chain again in revenge for their last battle, but would defeat him again. Having been captured into a slave camp by Manta, Hex organizes a breakout to escape and fights Starcad, Starkad, on his way out. Stanley Harris reveals himself to be one of the Dogs of War and enlists Jonah's services. They fight against the aliens that are invading for the future of humanity and succeed. But the alien explains that he is unable to send Hex back to his own time. On Thanksgiving Day, he gathers with Stiletta and remembers his family, finding his own stuffed corpse in amusement park. He takes comfort in the knowledge that someday he will get to go home. It is never explained whether Jonah went back to his own time or not. Two Gun Mojo. Jonah begins to take up with another bounty hunter named Slow Go Smith, who becomes his friend. Smith is killed by gun-toting zombies in a barn, and Hex is framed for his murder. Following their trail, Hex discovers it's the work of a snake oil merchant named Doc Cross Williams. It is revealed that Williams studied voodoo in Haiti and reanimated the corpse of Wild Bill Hickok as his personal bodyguard. Hickok, in case you guys want to know how that's spelled. They try to zombify Hex as well, but he escapes and tracks them down again. Jonah puts Hickok back down into the ground again by beating him on a draw, and then avenges his friend by leaving the doc to die in a slow, brutal death at the hands of Apache raiders. And then, following the slaying of Stove Belly Jack's gang, Hex meets a giant worm in the desert. He teams up with a local ranch who's been under attack by the creatures. And it is explained that the monsters are half-bred rape children of an underground race and a human woman, calling themselves the Auburn Brothers. Let's see. Whoa, almost lost my place there. Okay, Hex rallies the ranchers to take the offensive. They launch an assault on an underground tunnel system where the rest of the worms live, slaughtering them as they go and blowing up their queen with dynamite. Shadows West. Jonah becomes a member of Buffalo Bill's traveling Wild West show after a trick-shooting midget named Long Tom saves his life. He reconnects with an old friend named Spotted Balls. And meets a local... What the fuck? And meets a local SQUAW prostitute who gave birth to a bear boy. Okay. We're going into the weird part apparently. But she claims to have given birth after mating with a bear spirit. Hex decides to leave the camp with Spotted Balls and the prostitute because he doesn't like the way things are run. This infuriates Buffalo Will. Oh, no, it's not Buffalo Bill, it was actually Buffalo Will, who sends an armed posse led by Long Tom to murder them. Jonah murders most of the pursuers using traps, but Spotted Balls dies in the final shootout. He is able to return the prostitute and her cub to its father. Jonah finally meets the mystical spirit people returning to camp with Long Tom's corpse. He swears to Buffalo Will that if he ever sees him again, he'll kill him. Strong words. Okay, face full of violence. Okay. When a rich family hires him to track down their kidnapped son, he finds the boys become part of an underground dogfighting ring and is forced to put him down when he contracts rabies. In a conflict involving a stolen gold crucifix, he burns an entire mining town to the ground. Batlash helps him take revenge against a corrupt sheriff who framed him. The mayor of a small town tries to execute him to cover up an incestuous rape of his mute daughter, but the townsfolk lynch the politician instead, and on Christmas Day he gets into a gunfight and killing a dozen men to protect one of his bounties from their revenge attempts. And in the small town of Salvation, he met a local gang posing as nuns and try to murder him before he can reveal their secret. Death. Now, Jonah would continue to act as a bounty hunter until the age of 66 in 1904, where he is married to a Native American woman named Tallbird. His life story is documented by Michael Wheeler, the entertainer L.B. Farnham approaches him to become part of a Wild West revenue show in his old age, but Hex angrily refuses to let them turn him into a sideshow. His last bounty was a gang run by bank robber George Borrow. He succeeded in wiping them out, but Borrow returned for revenge several days later, playing cards at a Cheyenne saloon. Hex was murdered with Borrow's double-barreled shotgun while fumbling to put on his spectacles. His death was abruptly revenged by the lawman Hank Crawford, who gunned down the unarmed Barrow in cold blood. In his dying moments, Hex hallucinates and reflects on the life that he has lived. Talbert and Wheeler attempt to give Jonah a proper Native American burial, but they are robbed at gunpoint by Farnham and an accomplice. Farnham has Wheeler shot and the widow left unconscious to die in a house fire, which he steals Hex's corpse for his Wild West venue. Hex is taxidermied to be put on display permanently in a gaudy outfit, and the two evil men meet their ends, but his body is transported from location to location. His final resting place is as a dummy at a Westworld theme park. Eventually, he is discovered by historians, but Talbert is revealed to have survived the fire, and she claims his body. She does an interview with a young scholar to fill in the missing details of her husband's life, but they are assaulted by a Western memorabilia collector who demands to have the corpse at any cost. The evil collector is shot in the back before he can murder them, and it's implied that Jonah Hex's vengeful spirit returned to protect his wife from beyond the grave. And it says, post-mortem, many years later, a supermodel and actress named Hex seems to become possessed when her right eye is cut out by members of the agenda. She then assists Superboy and displays psionic powers where she repeatedly fires an unlimited energy weapon, but this change in consciousness seems to be temporary. Eventually, she decides to become a bounty hunter like her predecessor, riding Gorik the Living Gargoyle as her trusty steed, Grokk. He is reanimated during Blackest Night as a zombie member of the Black Lantern Corps. Wielding a power ring, he returns to plague Quentin Turnbull's descendant, Joshua Turnbull. Joshua attacks Hex with a rocket launcher but fails to destroy him. The young man pleads for his life to zombie versions of Jonah Hex and Quentin Turnbull, but his ancestor guns him down in cold blood. Every zombie is restored to normal when Hal Jordan defeated Necron. Guns in Gotham. Following a change to the time stream as a result of the events of Flashpoint, history has changed, and during the 1880s, Amadeus Arkham was recruited by Detective Lofton of Gotham City Police Department to solve a case of the Gotham Butcher. Police Chief John Cromwell didn't take too kindly to Arkham's theories, nor to the eventual recruitment of bounty hunter Jonah Hex, who had recently caused a stir in the coming town. Even so, recognizing Hex's street smarts, Arkham suggested that the two of them join forces in performing a separate investigation into the case. Together they uncovered Gotham City's sect of the Religion of Crime and its relation to the Butcher case. And, that's pretty much about it, guys. There's not much else to really talk about with Jonah Hex. And I think I've really rambled on quite enough. I mean, it's now going over 30 minutes here, guys. Not that most of the other videos for characters with this long a history, have that problem, but still, I don't really know what else to say, guys. So I'm just going to leave it at this. That is this has been Jonah Hex's lesser known. I discredit the Josh Brolin movie because really, while Hex did have a lot of time travel stuff, as you can tell, there was at no point in the Wild West a steampunked horse that had guns come out of it and a rocket launcher come out of its maw. But anyway, guys, this is the true comic book history of Jonah Hex. Hopefully some of you enjoyed it. Hopefully, it washes out the bad taste of the movie. And as always, guys, stay tuned for the next one.